do you experience when you patiently endure the same sufferings that we suffer? Our hope for you is unshaken, for we know that as you share in our sufferings, you will also share in our comfort. For we do not want you to be unaware, brothers, of the affliction we have experienced in Asia. For we were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt that we had received the sentence of death. But that was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. He delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us. On him we have set our hope that he will deliver us again. You also must help us by prayer, so that many will give thanks on our behalf for the blessing granted to us through the prayers of many.
Thanks. Also just want a brief apologies to those watching the recording of this workshop. I pressed the recording a bit late, but what happened is we've just started reading 2 Corinthians 1, verse 1 to 11. All right. And thanks for reading. Let me just ask a preliminary question for discussion. Is the Christian life comfortable? I see shaking of heads. But in a way, what if, like, we can't deny there are moments that are comfortable, right?
I think you can make it as comfortable as you want it to be. It just depends on how much of a Christian you want to be, I guess. Like how much you were willing to like suffer for.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good point. In a way, also, it may not be suffering that you are willing to undertake. I mean, in this verse, we see Paul undertook a suffering almost to the brink of death. Something I'm quite sure he doesn't want, but push through.
Yeah,
and
I think.
Yeah.
No, because I feel I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm too in my comfort zone of not like putting active or evangelizing. I don't know the extent of the sufferings that will come when we actually put our whole 100% effort in preaching the gospel. So I can't say from experience that it's comfortable. But I know that there's way more in evangelizing, and there's way more discomfort that the missionaries have to endure.
Yes. And that will be a key point. Like, there's a lot of ways to suffer, to put it very bleakly. Paul's way is one of the ways, and one of the most serious ways. But in a way, and I'll expound on that more later, we all face a suffering that's similar. But just to turn back to the point on comfort, you'll notice here that what the comfort we're speaking of is not an ordinary sense of comfort. At least the comfort Paul is speaking of. It's not comfort in the sense of a pleasurable feeling or a moment of niceness, so to speak. I chose this letter in 2 Corinthians 1 because it's fitting for all of us in context. If you notice, Paul is talking about his travel decisions. To those of you who read the whole of 2 Corinthians 1, you know he has traveled around and he's writing to the people in Corinth who he has visited, doing two things. Firstly, warning them of the sins they are involved in, because they were involved in various sort of false teachings and misunderstandings. And also, the second thing is protecting the integrity of his ministry. Now, the key point I sort of want to take here is that, and the key aspect for the purposes of our workshop, is that even though he is afar and present in a different church context, he still sort of looks to the principle of comfort, the principle of comfort in suffering, to be more specific. He explains that his travel decisions involves that sort of affliction. If you notice, it's almost like he did not answer the question. They're sort of a bit surprised why he left. They're asking, why did you leave, Paul? And he's saying, I am going about I am experiencing this level of suffering, but I'm experiencing comfort within that suffering. And then he expounds on that suffering even more. He talks about it being like a sentence of death. Yet there is comfort in that. And this should flesh out the definition of comfort. And if we actually go sort of deeper into this, we see that the comfort is because he is in affliction. He has Christ who comforts him in that affliction. And also all those in any affliction. And the reason given in verse 5, beginning with the word for, the reason is that we share suffering in Christ. Sorry, we share abundantly in Christ's sufferings. So this is a picture of the gospel. It's a corollary of the gospel. That it follows logically that because we are in Christ, we share each other's burdens. And this takes place regardless of, in the context of traveling, regardless of whether we're in Malaysia or the UK. This is important for the application later. But this section was meant to provide an understanding of the key aspect of the passage that I would like to bring out. And now we can go to some questions. How recent was your previous move? For example, do you just move to university, or have you been living here a few years, or living in the UK a few years in general? What do you? And I'd like everyone to answer this question. Like, where are you guys now?
I'm currently in London. So I'm going to fourth year. So it's been about 3 or 4 years. I went to Malaysia during COVID and last year as well. So I feel like I've only been in London for about like 2 years maybe.
I
Yeah.
see. Yeah, no, that's a strange feeling, right? You're sort of studying here, but you're back home as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. In a way, like when I was thinking of how to write this passage, I also wanted to address that sort of COVID dissonance. Because usually what we would tell students is you have your home church, but you're in the UK, and it's, of course, you won't be able to be as active in your home church. But the COVID situation allowed you to be at home and actively serve in your home church while being part of the UK church. And when I was in that phase, I was at home during my second year as well. And I was trying to serve both, and I felt very confused. This was very strange. And so I thought, how would like the biblical figures face it? What's the closest analogy? And in my opinion, and feel free to like disagree on this, I know this is a point of like more of application. Paul, in traveling between places and still keeping in touch with his home like church, so to speak, with other churches, although although he didn't have technically a home church in the sense that we do, but he was keeping in touch with the various churches around the area. It's a closest analogy to that. And he turns the question, I think, not on how do we allocate time between both churches, but on how do we share our sufferings together, and how do we comfort one another. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I mean, what about the rest of you guys? What stage are you at?
Yeah, so I'm currently in Norwich, which is the most east of England. I've been here for a little over a year. So I moved here August of last year for work. And then, funny when you ask who moved recently, because I just moved houses like last week. But I only moved like 2 houses down, so it's not a very big move. Yeah. Yeah, but I was in Colchester actually as a student, so I moved to Norwich.
I see. Yeah, Norwich is a lovely place. I've been a few times.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it is really nice. I love it.
The eastmost, the eastmost town. It's technically, interestingly enough, it's technically a city because it has a cathedral.
Yeah, it is. I'm very like proud of it. It is a city.
Good. How about you, Joel?
I'm actually flying to UK this September for my 3rd and 4th year. So I'm the most inexperienced one here, so it's my first time to UK this September. Yeah.
Nice.
I think I need to get myself ready mentally to move over there. Yeah, but that's where I'm at.
Good. Yeah, I know it's a big change, and what you're doing is really good, sort of meeting people like us who have been there. I know it's scary, but trust me, you get used to it. It's not that bad. I was like that as well in my first year. So I was also very nervous. I was asking around, oh no, what do I do? How will I deal with the jump? But it's not that after the initial maybe couple months you should be fine. Where are you going to?
Southampton.
Oh, then nice. So you're on the engineering program, is it?
Yes, engineering also.
Yes. So yeah, you probably know Nick, and
yeah.
yeah, and yeah, that's also good. You can form your connections, and that's also something you think about it. Not sorry, something that is very, very sort of biblical, but sort of we have practical concerns that we want to share with one another. Even something again, I'll flesh out in the latter point, like how although Paul is talking about sufferings, we God comforts us in all our comforts, and that covers everything. Tim, do you want to answer as well? Or are you away? Okay, he might be away. Never mind. Yes, let's go on to the next part of the question. No, what? No, actually, no. So let's go on to the second question first. How does the idea of comfort and suffering being simultaneous make you feel? Because this is a key exegetical point. No. But what do you think of that?
I think it's quite hard for me to wrap my head around. When I think of suffering, I think for me personally, I'm very grateful that suffering is just kind of like mild discomfort that is not that much of a suffering, but it's like mild discomfort. And comfort is kind of like a nice feeling, even though that's not what you said it was at the start. And I think I'm still trying to figure out how comfort looks like in Christ for myself and how that helps in my suffering. Yeah, so for now it's just kind of hard to get my mind wrapped around. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
sorry, go on.
I was just gonna say, like, I think at first the two ideas sound contradicting, like how do they exist at the same time? But I think I think one thing I've just been learning is just like as Christians, when we view suffering or when we go through suffering, we can find comfort knowing that there is a purpose in our suffering. Whereas I think when we take Jesus out of the picture, then suffering is just very like meaningless and bleak, and like it's just not enjoyable. Not that I'm saying that Christians enjoy suffering, but I think just knowing that there's a purpose for it, just like it makes a world of a difference.
Yeah, exactly. Like, because I think one key exegetical point is to put down the ordinary definition of suffering. And I'm not saying anyone here like held on to it, and the ordinary definition of comfort. Because when you look at both comfort and suffering in the Bible, you know that it's there for good. It's not inherently good. God doesn't. In fact, we know in Micah, God paints a picture of everyone sitting down under their own wine and fig tree in a picture of rest, without suffering, without any labor. But we also know that suffering produces character, endurance, character, hope. It's it's almost like the Bible tells us to put aside our worldly definitions. A transformative English teacher almost. Although I caveat the Bible was not written in English, but just to just to um just to use an analogy. I think in recent years, international students, or those living abroad in general, have even more ways to suffer. And I'm not just thinking about COVID and being locked down and the loneliness of that, although that's the main part, but also in sort of wondering why does God let so much evil or uncertainty happen? Especially when you're in a vulnerable position being students abroad. Yeah. And it's that sort of questioning that we will explore further below. But just before that, moving to the next principle, on honesty in our sufferings. We see that, I mean, I think a preliminary question here, although I didn't put it in the booklet, but if it's all right, me ask it now. Are we honest in our sufferings currently in Malaysia, among our communities? Are we able to be honest? What do you think?
Honest in terms of like sharing your troubles with others, is it?
Yes.
Honest.
I mean, feel free to say no. It's a challenge in our home church, honestly.
Yeah, I guess it did. From experience, how to say?
No worries. If anyone can go next, if it comes back to you, feel free to unmute and say.
I can't speak for how it is like in my home church back in Malaysia because I'm currently in the process of finding one. But here in London, I think the culture in my church is that we're getting to a point where we can share our sufferings honestly with one another. But I think personally, it doesn't come naturally to me. I think it won't be something that I'll naturally be inclined to say to people. Like I'd reserve it for a very small group of people. And even that, it takes like a while for me to sort through everything and then only be honest with my sufferings. But in being honest with my sufferings, there's a lot of negative connotations that I attach to it. Like I tend to think being honest means that I'm kind of being selfish and sharing my sufferings with other people, even though that's really not the case.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I know I think that's one of the major challenges. Like sharing will sometimes make you feel like you're only talking about yourself, and you don't want to be selfish. Although you know that's not. I'm glad you know that's not evidence of selfishness.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Also, bringing up Zoe's point of I think everyone experiences this also. I mean, I do respect that the church try to provide a space for those Christians to, provide a space for us to share about each other's sufferings. But I do not know why it's quite difficult, especially in a public setting, and only that after that you kind of close it to a small group of people. And yeah, maybe there's some sort of a stigma attached to like sharing your sufferings. Some people may look down on you, and yeah. For example, like let's say one situation, and I think all boys experience is sexual immorality. I don't think surprisingly it's a taboo subject among churches. We deal with our own issues, but it's not a common discussion among the church. And because of that, the church is limited to what assistance it can provide for the churchmen and churchwomen. Yeah.
Yeah. You're mentioning a very key practical problem as well. You mentioned resources as one of them. I know you mentioned other things though, but just honing in on that, that's also the other issue that I think this is a good segue into the main body. And I think I'll keep this rather brief because I think you guys get the idea. If we if we see someone on the ground about to die, physically wiggling to the point of death, we would be willing and certainly want to help whoever's on the ground. I think likewise, if we see a brother and sister struggling, even if to some extent to the point of death, not entirely, we should still want to go and assist in whatever ways we can. And this analogy of death, I know it's not to be used lightly. I know not everyone's suffering it's not always a situation where if you don't assist, that person is going to die in some way. But the point we're putting forward is that we sort of never know the level of suffering someone may face is intense. If I may cite a statement from Charles Spurgeon. Charles Spurgeon is a well-known minister in London, and he talks about this event in his ministry. So I'm just going to read. One Sabbath morning, I preached from the text, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And though I did not say so, yet I preached my own experience. I heard my own chains clank while I tried to preach to my fellow prisoners in the dark. But I could not tell why I was brought into such an awful horror of darkness, for which I condemned myself. On the following Monday evening, a man came to see me who bore all the marks of despair upon his countenance. His hair seemed to stand upright, and his eyes were ready to start from their sockets. He said to me, I never before in my life heard any man speak who seemed to know my heart. Mine is a terrible case, but on Sunday morning you painted me to the life and preached as if you had been in my soul. By God's grace, I saved that man from suicide and led him into the gospel light and liberty. The point is that Charles Spurgeon was trying to make is that in sharing our sufferings, we may actually assist someone who really needs it, which you never really know. I split the second part, the application point, honesty in our sufferings, into 4 questions. And I think I've sort of answered the what suffering is like and why we do so. It's important now to think of the how. That's the practical element. It's firstly, as I mentioned earlier, distance doesn't stop Paul from comforting his brothers and sisters. That's clear. But secondly, and this links to Brian's talk, there must be something about meeting our brothers and sisters as well, even though distance doesn't stop us. I mean, otherwise, why does Hebrews 10:25 say, let us not neglect meeting together, but encourage one another, all the more as you see the day approaching? The fact that neglect meeting together and encouraging one another are placed in opposite positions is telling of some importance of physical church. And you notice this when you go to the UK, that sometimes it may feel like it's harder to share with the locals there, with British there. And I'm not just talking about those who are ethnically white, but anyone who has a different cultural background from us. I remember talking to the student worker at St. Helens, who I met recently when visiting around. And he was telling he's someone who works with Southeast Asians, and he was telling me that he sort of knows the two sides. He knows Southeast Asians are very shy and it's hard to open up. But he also knows that British people has a level of coldness and aloofness. But he explained once you break through the coldness, they're actually very friendly. That's one thing that I think it's useful to know as not just a practical element, but to live up to the biblical ideal of sharing our sufferings. Because often we start with genuine friendship. That's the way it works. Although I'm not saying that you cannot sort of comfort a person who isn't your friend, but in general, the common scenario is you would open up to a fellow brother or sister in Christ. And sort of recognizing the way people are different from one another, maybe the certain cultural aloofness in the British, and we'll be willing to pierce through that, would be one way we can do so. We might find it a bit strange, especially coming from our culture, and here's also worthwhile looking back on ourselves. We have a culture of always being the one to talk to guests, on opening up to them, on welcoming them. And it feels like when we go to the UK, we might expect the same. But we might be faced with a level of what seems to be coldness until we break through. And that might actually mean practically sometimes we may need to go forward and take the action of initiating the conversation. I can say that I did that, in fact, most of the time while I was in making some of my closest friends who are British. But that shouldn't be a problem. Like, why would it be a problem? Because what the Bible tells us is not initiate gathering with one another, but it's together. It's not be the first one to speak, but to share our burdens with one another. And this ultimately plays into some important sort of duties we have to one another. In 2 Timothy 4 verse 2, we know that we have a duty to exhort and rebuke, among other things. And here it's worthwhile asking yourself a question. How do we live up to that? How do we exhort and rebuke those who we don't even have a friendship with? And again, that might be possible, but would it be effective? And sometimes, in fact, there may be situations even where you just meet one person and you for just one time in your life, maybe they're just passing through. And even then they might say something, a word of exhortation or rebuke that will change you and transform you. That's also something to think about, because you will meet a lot of people who you may not see so often. You may only see them once or twice in your whole time in the UK. But yet the duty in 2 Timothy 4 verse 2 remains. So I hope you see the picture here of how honesty in our sufferings has a very practical element for someone living abroad. There are various challenges to face. Yes, now on to the questions. I sort of asked this again earlier, but hopefully now, after listening to this, I just want to ask it again. Do you find it easy to be honest about your sufferings? Why or why not?
Sorry, your question is easy to share your suffering?
Yes.
Okay. For me, it depends on the people again. yeah, sometimes I can tell that the other party who's listening is putting an effort to listening to what I said and also like offer helpful advice. Some people don't do much, but they're willing to lend an ear. Some people are not interested. So yeah, it depends.
Yeah. Yeah, that's also a good point. You meet a spectrum of people in church. Sadly, sometimes even there, you don't get a listening ear. But I guess that's the importance of remembering the biblical ideal, right? About it's not about that. It's we sometimes that we all go through challenges, and it's important to share even if the other person isn't so receptive. Right. Yeah. I just caveat that. Of course, what I'm not saying is to sort of pester the person and make them listen. Then just caveat that, but it's sort of just this idea of how the Christian life should be like. Mm. Mm. No, how about you? What do the rest of you think?
Yeah, I think I also find it quite difficult. Yeah, maybe because it's our culture where we just don't share our personal feelings as much. And yeah, I think I really relate to when you said that, like, yeah, I think British people might have like an exterior where it's a bit harder to break through. But I think once you, yeah, I think I've like, yeah, people have also told me that like being honest with our suffering and like just when we are struggling gives our church the opportunity to love and serve us well too. So if we don't do that, then they can't, they can't love you well. So I think, yeah, it's just a reminder that that they are Christians too, that we're all sinful beings and we all fail and can disappoint each other, but if we're all striving to serve Jesus and serve each other well, like we have to give each other the opportunity to do so. And that involves being like, it's not, I don't think it's ever an easy relationship because it requires a lot of vulnerability and it opens ourselves up to getting hurt, but it's worth it all because like that is like there is a bigger purpose in why we're doing church. So
Yeah, very very well said. It, sometimes this links also to like what we need to learn from another. In a way, I think a lot of British people have been rebuked for their coldness. They realize now it's actually not the nicest thing to do. It might be a bad thing in terms of ministry. And I can see some of my British friends striving to like avoid to stop that. Yeah. And I think that likewise the same principle applies to us. Like we find it hard to share. And to some extent we actually are warranted to. I mean, sometimes it's if someone doesn't want to listen, you don't want to push it on them. But it's about not letting that come to the point where you lose hope in sort of trusting people to be able to live up to that. It won't be a perfect ideal because as you very, very well put, we're all sinners and we all disappoint one another. Even the best listener may have his off days sometimes. But we do it out of because that's because we already do it, in fact. We already share in Christ's sufferings. Therefore we continue to do so with our fellow sharers. How about you, Zoe? What do you think?
I think I wouldn't say it's easy because it inherently is quite a hard thing to do. But I think I'm inclined to be the first person to share rather than waiting for other people to share their sufferings first, and then only I'll do it. Because I think the problem with having that mindset is that if you constantly wait for other people to share, then it's not helpful in. And I think part of the reason why we find it difficult to share is because we think that doesn't fit in with the culture around us of sharing our sufferings. And for that culture to change, we have to change ourselves, even though that's quite a hard thing to do. So I think just having the mindset of wanting to share and being willing to share is like a first step into making it easy to share and making it easy for other people to share too. Yeah, no, I agree about that. I thought it was very helpful that Charmaine said how that gives us an opportunity to serve and love one another, which is such a big calling that we have. And yeah, I think it's helpful that you put it that way.
Yes. Yes, thanks. One more sort of the question that links to this also, I sort of want to ask, and this is more of a practical question. But do you feel constrained by your personality? Examples, maybe feeling like being an extrovert or introvert in living up to this principle. Joel's back. I'll just repeat the question for your benefit. So we're asking the second question. Do you feel constrained by your personality, either extroversion or introversion, or others? That's just an example. Or in living up to the principle that we just talked about.
I don't think
Yes.
extroversion or no, you go.
I'll say you go first.
I don't think like being an introvert myself, I don't think like that's the biggest obstacle. I think it's more my personality in general is that I tend to hold everything in until the point where like I really cannot. And I tend to always let other people go before me, and I don't like confrontation. And I think, yeah, I think that's just one aspect of my personality that stops me from doing it.
Good. I'm glad. I'm glad it doesn't. I'm glad the introversion part doesn't stop you, because I know it does stop other people. Hence why I brought it up, where they say that they're just an introvert. They don't want to share, but it has a detrimental effect on their spiritual journey. I'm not saying that extroverts are like perfect in their spiritual journey. Yeah, they have other problems as well, not being committed to a friend to share, or just speaking superficially. Yeah. Joel, what do you think?
I take back my answer. I think it's more of a no, but as much as introvert I am, I feel sometimes it hurts to kind of bottle up the things that you have in your heart. So I always find it a pleasure when there's an opportunity to just share your sufferings. But I guess that sometimes that introversion comes in when the mood is not right. Let's say in a public setting, in a public table, and then you're asked to say share about some of your issues. And then maybe the introversion kicks in, and then think, but it's not as much the influence of the introversion. But yeah, that's all from me.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I think you sort of flesh out the question even more. You're saying that it's introversion, extroversion doesn't so much stop us from sharing as it sort of stops us from making that initial move before we share.
Yeah.
I mean, just looking at the time, I guess better move to the final principle. A very good conversation. The last one was about affliction, and I thought I'd start this by giving a Greek definition of the word affliction, because I think it says a lot. It comes from the word thlipsis, which means being pressed together. And that alone is quite telling. You feel constrained by the world, pushed against one another because you're feeling the same pressure from the brokenness. And if you think about that, if you think about the fact that you're all in the sardine can together, don't you think you should be willing to share and open up? It's as though you're going to be cooked alive, to put it a very gruesome metaphor. Although you won't be. Paul was put to the point of death, but he wasn't actually. I mean, he wasn't in the spiritual sense. He wasn't actually killed by this suffering. And of course, there are in the extreme cases, people do get martyred, and that's that suffering. But we know that comes with an eternal reward. But to not digress too far into those issues, to just talk about affliction that we ourselves face, probably as international students studying in the UK. Some of them are things you probably have heard your friends or family warn you about. Bullying of internationals. There's a clear COVID-19 lockdown and the effects of it on our education system. But there are also, as Christians, worldly views. Views of the UK that are surprising, to me at least. I remember when I went first to the UK, thinking it was a Christian country, moving from obviously Malaysia, which isn't a Christian country, thinking that there'll be perhaps some new perspectives on Christianity that will edify me. I remember being hit hard with the idea of liberal Christianity, and two of the theologians I first met were people who didn't really seem to be Christians who took the Bible seriously, other than as a scholastic method. And I remember a sense of surprise at how Christianity was in England. That's the worldly view part of it. I was fortunate enough not to face any bullying of internationals, but I could sense sort of a look that people will always know, like you're not from there originally. There is that sort of feeling nonetheless, even if people don't actually think that when they talk to you. And in that sense, you're in a more vulnerable position. I remember during COVID-19, all international students were told to leave immediately. And we had to book flights last minute, because I remember the words clearly of the academic the leader of the college, just basically someone in authority, saying that we cannot take care of you, quite explicitly, to all us international students. And then you start to realize COVID-19 brought that out, that you're in a bigger vulnerable position when you're abroad. But looking at affliction itself, when we see that so much of it, it prompts us to ask, is there a reason for this? And yes, sometimes there is a reason. What did we just learn earlier? To comfort one another. Because we went through something like this, hopefully because I went through something like this, I can provide an encouraging word to people who hear the story now. But of course, there's sometimes also little explanation as to why we are afflicted. Think of Job, for example. God didn't explain why he suffered. Only at the end, God explained, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? That wasn't so much an answer as a reminder of Job to fear God. And I think the point of mentioning this is not to give you guys an answer as well, but to remind you of course, the rather worrying situation that we face a different set, a greater set of afflictions being international students abroad. But in doing so, we also perhaps identify with Christ even more. Christ, who, like Job, was made to suffer for a reason that had nothing to do with him. Even to an even greater extent, in fact. And the God of all comfort, not just Paul's suffering, but yours as well. This is a point that I alluded to earlier, but I want to flesh out now. We know in 2 Corinthians 1, it's described that God is the God of all comfort. Because I don't want anyone to feel that I didn't face any suffering like Paul's being shipwrecked, being separated from his community. Or I don't want you to say I didn't face any sufferings like your fellow other Christians who may be going through worse situations. Because in all suffering, all of it brings you to God. All of it helps you grow closer to Him. In a way, and I like to think about it like that, although Paul was to the point of death, we are all dying every day. Isn't that what our living our new lives as transformed by the cross is? And because we're dying to our old selves every day and living a new life every day, we face sufferings from the world, being different, being in it but not of it. I also just want to end like the section with the importance of action. Note that the Charles Spurgeon example again, he took action to talk to the man, to deliver the sermon, and that by God's grace saved the man from suicide. He didn't intend to save the man from suicide, but he took action to stand up and preach and speak to God and encourage others even when he himself was suffering. To those of you who know a bit more about his life, he's someone who suffered from depression. And the fact that, and you can that sort of gives context to what he's speaking about. And of course, note actions like Job as well, the biblical characters. Sometimes the action may just be bowing down and waiting, like Job did. And that's all that we can do sometimes until Christ restores. We see how Job's family and possessions were restored at the end. That's also one more key exegetical point, to think about the restoration that will come. Onto the questions, like maybe here where we can look at the specific burdens. So what are the burdens placed upon you as a student, and more so as a former student living abroad?
I think it's a few things. I feel like there's a general sense of loneliness that international students always get, whether or not it's constant or like now and then. And also just having to fulfill a lot of roles, like being a student, being a member of a church, doing your part in church, and also being a family member far away from home, and kind of balancing your studies and your time in church, and also like how you're serving the church back home as well, and how you're serving family back home and your friends back home, and just in general all the burdens that you have. Yeah.
Yeah. We have that sense of filial piety, of duty to study, but also to take care and keep in touch with those back home. What did the rest of you guys think?
I think one of the burdens that I struggled most with, like coming to the UK, has just been like the feeling of like this is not my home and this is not the culture that I'm familiar with. And yeah, I think, yeah, sometimes it can be very difficult because it also happens in church or like in a Christian environment. But obviously with the church, like it's not intentional and people aren't trying to single you out. But I think, yeah, I think it's just, yeah, natural because when, yeah, you're surrounded by people who grew up in a very similar culture, they'll tend to talk about their similarities because that's what we like to do as people, right? So like, yeah, sometimes there's just times where you can't help but to feel excluded. Yeah, but I think, yeah, but I think that's also just like a very good reminder of how we view home. And yeah, like this, yeah, this is just like our temporary home, and we have, yeah, I think it reveals also like our longing for something that's eternal. And yeah, like it is difficult, and I don't want to scare Joe because he's not in the UK yet. But you will find really great people here too who will yeah, who really try to welcome you well, and yeah, I think it just, yeah, it shows like the greater like human condition and how like Jesus and God like offers a better solution. So yeah.
Yes. And yeah, thank you for that. I just want to caveat for Joel's benefit. Although I worded the workshop to focus on the dangerous part, I had a very good community around me. So don't feel afraid. And it goes to everyone. Yeah. But yes, Charmaine, I like what you said about this is not our home. Like that's exactly what the Christian life is, right? And it seems that going abroad helps us identify with that even more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I
think
guess
that was very encouraging because I think I've been struggling like with the idea of home as well. And I think, is London my home because I have so much friends and community around me, but is home actually home back in Malaysia, and because family is there. And then
exactly.
thinking what home is like and what constitutes a home, what will be home for me in the future. But I think it's really helpful that you said how home is own, or we have an internal home which is with God and in the new creation. I think that's so encouraging because it really reminds me that this world is so broken, and trying to find a home in that isn't really going to help anything. Yeah, I just thought that was encouraging.
Yeah, since it's ending, I guess I'll just end with a few words like thanks so much for listening, and please continue to stay in the conference. We're taking a break after this for for lunch, but do come back and hear more about the church. It all surrounds, it all is to do with the people that we're around, and more importantly, the people, why we're around those people, what is the affinity we share, and that is Christ. I hope this was encouraging and gives you perspectives on how we can think about our ministry and our lives as international students, and how that fits into the global church. Yeah, see you
Thanks for
all.
sharing. Yeah.
Thank you.